Hello! In this tutorial I want to speak about RBC addon, and in particular I want to help you to prepare your car properly for any physics simulation. RBC addon for Blender is a fantastic piece of addon in which basically you indicate this is the body of the car, this is the left tire, this is the right tire, and then just click on one button for generating the rig automatically in a few clicks. And finally you are ready to drive your car directly in real time in Blender. You can then record this animation to keyframes. You can insert this animation into your movie. It doesn't have any limit. You can do a lot of interesting stuff, like car crashes. You can even smash your car. But the thing is that I see a lot of people having troubles when trying to click on the generate rig button. They basically have always the same problems. So I decided to make this tutorial in order to summarize in just one single video all the solution in order to prepare your object for physics simulations. So before jumping into the addon or before doing any physics simulation or car crashes or car simulation, you have to prepare properly your object, your mesh. Before anything, you have to work in real-life scale. If you press N, you can pull out this menu item, and you want to check this panel called dimensions. You can see this car is big 43 meters in the length, which is not possible. So if you want to scale everything down and at the same time constantly check the dimension of the length, you can do this. First select the body of the car and then press A to select all the rest, and then press S to scale down. And you can see that we are scaling down and at the same time constantly checking the meters. So now this car is long 4 meters, but I actually suggest to set this car a little bit, just a little bit bigger compared to real life. Like this, like a length of 6 meters is fine. The reason for this is because Blender physics works better with big stuff. Another thing to do after this, you can see this is the red line of the ground. So just ensure that your car is a little bit above the ground and not below the ground. Otherwise, RBC addon can create problems. In the first part of this video, we're gonna see what to do when you import some objects that you download from internet. Tip number 1, clearing parents. We have to clear the parenting relations. You can see that there is this empty at the bottom. Sometimes can happen to see these empties. Whenever I move this empty, this is moving also the car. This is a very common situation. So first of all, select all the objects by pressing A, and then go to the menu Object, Parent, Clear and Keep Transformation. And finally, this has deleted all relations between these objects, and they are all free to move independently. Tip number 2, deleting all useless empties. It's a very important thing to do, to delete all the useless empties that can be in the middle of your object, because those can interrupt the workflow of RBC addon in future. There are many empties sometimes. You just need to select one of them, and then you go to menu Select, select Grouped, Type. This function will select automatically all the objects that are the same type of objects, in this case empties, so that we can finally find all of them without having to go search manually. For example, you can see that there is an empty inside the car that I would for sure never have seen that. And finally we can press X and delete them. And finally we got only our mesh without any additional empties. Tip number 3, adjusting orientation. RBC addon wants you to align the rotation of your car. If you go on the menu View, Viewport and choose Front, you should see the front part of your car. In this case, for example, the orientation is wrong because I see the right part. So you might want to rotate your car until it is aligned with the world orientation. For a precise rotation, you can press on the keyboard this button R, Z, and then exactly type 180, which stays 180 degrees. Tip number 4, deleting the double vertices. Every time I download an object from internet, it comes with double vertices. If you go in edit mode, you will notice down here the total amount of vertices that you have in this object. In this case, more than 2 millions. They are literally too many. So if you press A to select all the vertices, in vertices mode of course, and then you go to menu Mesh, Clean up, merge by distance. This function will delete all the double vertices. Double vertices are basically two vertices that stays in the same exact place, which doesn't make sense. You can see in this case, Blender has found more than 500,000 vertices. So they are uselessly slowing down Blender, and for physics simulation this is crucial. The less geometry you have and the better and faster everything is gonna be. Tip number 5, deleting the loose vertices. If you select your object and go in Edit mode, in Vertices mode, you press A to select all the vertices. Then let's go in the menu Mesh, Clean Up, Delete, Loose. And you will see down here, removed a lot of vertices. Loose vertices are basically vertices that are flying in the air for no reason. Tip number 6. Separating parts. The most convenient way of separating parts of the car that I found out is this. Start from the car body, selecting everything that you can manually with select boxes, maybe using also the circular tool to select the most that you can about the car body only. And then you can easily expand the selection by going on the menu Select, Select More, and you can see this voice, Select More. It's the same thing of pressing many times Ctrl Numpad plus many times on the keyboard. So by doing this, you are sure that you are involving all the vertices of the car body in this selection. And finally, you are ready to separate these faces from the rest of the car. If you exit from edit mode, you can see that we correctly separated the body from the tires. Once you have separated the body of the car from the tires, the rest is gonna be very easy to do. And so you just go on separating all the tires until they are all single separated objects. Eventually, if you are going for a car destruction, you want to separate additional parts like the bumper, for example. In case you want to separate the door because maybe you want the door to open during a car crash simulation, you simply need to select the perimeter edges like this, and then you go to the menu Select, select Loops, select Loop Inner Region. This will automatically select for you all the faces inside this perimeter. And finally, we can go to menu Mesh, Separate Selection. And we got a separated door from the rest of the car. Cool. By the way, whenever you need it, there is always the circular tool that you can use by pressing C on the keyboard that is very useful for painting a specific selection. In some cases, you can even use the L button function. What I mean, let's go in edit mode and first click outside to deselect eventual selection. If you put the mouse over some area like the door and you press L, and yes, in this case it's working, you can see that this geometry is actually separated. Even if it's part of this mesh, this is an island, a so-called island. Sometimes this trick works also for the tires. When you have an object that is just a single object, including the tires, just put the mouse on the tire and press L. And at this point we can press P and separate selection. If you exit from edit mode, you can see that we have finally separated the door. Tip number 7. Decimate geometry. When you download objects from internet, they always have a lot of geometry that you don't need. So you want to use the decimate modifier, especially in the tires. You can see in this case we have more than 1 million vertices just for the tires. So you basically want to push this ratio value of the decimate modifier until you see that you are starting to destroy too much the geometry. And finally you can click on this arrow to apply the decimate and finally delete all the useless geometry forever. When you are done with this, you can do the same for the body of the car. So basically you decimate your object, reducing the geometry as much as you can. Just don't exaggerate too much. Whenever you see that visible glitches or errors in the geometry are starting to appear, you just want to stop decimating. Generally speaking, you want to have as less geometry as possible if you are going for physics simulations. Less geometry means real-time response. It's also a good idea to apply a decimation only to specific areas of your car. For example, if I am going to destroy this car, for example, I will need a lot of geometry in the external part that is the more visible, basically. Instead, in the frontal, for example, there is this grille. Grille is always a part of the car in which there are millions of unnecessary vertices. So what you can do is to go in edit mode and select those parts that you want to isolate. Create a vertex group by clicking on this plus button, and then click on Assign to save this selective part of the car, and then you can exit from edit mode. And then in the modifiers tab, we can go to apply a decimate modifier, and in the decimate modifier there is the option for choosing the vertex group to which we can apply this decimate. So just choose the vertex group that we just created, and now the decimate modifier is applying only in that saved vertex group. Sometimes it's also useful to do this for making the inverted selection by simply clicking on this button. Tip number 8. Clear custom split normals data. Whenever you try to decimate an object downloaded from internet, the first thing that you notice is that some weirdness starts to happen in the geometry shading. Like in this case, you can see in the windows or in the doors, there is some very visible glitches happening whenever I just increase a little bit the decimation. Don't worry for that, there is just a very quick fix. If you just click in this button, clear custom split normals data, this will immediately delete all the saved information about split data, and the object is basically back at looking good, even if it's a very low poly version. Once you have clicked on the button for deleting all the custom split normals data, ensure that your car is in auto smooth by simply going here under normals and activate the auto smooth. And at this point, you can even go on pushing the decimation like a lot. The auto smooth function is gonna preserve all these defining lines that are typical of every car model. Tip number 9. Preventing cycles glitches like this when using motion blur. A very important choice that we have to do. If your car is just gonna drive around your environment without any deformation, without any car crash, with the auto smooth, you are good to go and just proceed to the next step. Instead, if you know that you are going for a car crash, some deformation or stuff like that, the auto smooth is not good for the parts that are gonna deform. For example, the car body. Reason for this is that if you have a mesh that is deforming, that has also the auto smooth active, that's gonna generate some nonsense glitch in cycles. This is a very known limitation of cycles. So the fix for this is select the parts that are gonna deform, for example the body of the car in this case, if you are going for a car crash, and turn off the auto smooth. Remember the angle that we have here in the auto smooth, in this case is 30 degrees. So with this mesh selected, I'm gonna right click and shade instead smooth. This is the option that you want if you are going for having a car crash in cycles. And then what we need to do is to go in the modifiers panel and give an edge split modifier, this one here. This is gonna increase a little bit the amount of geometry that you have, but it's gonna preserve these defining lines that you have, even if you have the shade smooth in your mesh, which is quite important. Just ensure that the degrees that you have here are the same that you saw in the auto smooth. Once you have this edge split, simply go in this arrow and apply it. It's going to require a little bit of time for the apply because this is going to increase the vertices a lot, and this is also why it's so important to start with a very low poly version of your model. I will repeat this once more just in case. You have to do this step for every part of the car that is going to deform with simulation, distraction or similar stuff. So for example, we don't need to do this for the tire. The tire is not going to deform. In my case, I never deform the tires, I just animate them. So in the tires, I'm just going to activate the auto smooth and it's going to be good to go. And same goes, for example, for this part. This is probably not going to deform, and so right click and shade auto smooth. This is going to be okay. Basically the parts in which I would potentially apply the edge split modifier is the body of the car, the door, because those are going to deform in a car crash for sure. Maybe the bumper, in this case I still had to separate it, but you understand the logic behind it. And it's very important that you not only give this modifier, but also you have to apply it. Tip number 10. Set origin to the center. Now that we have separated correctly all the components of this car, you can notice that the origin of every object is not in the center. For example, for this bumper, its origin is here. So whenever I try to rotate it or scale, it's rotating in a weird way. So we simply need to select all these objects in wireframe mode, X-ray vision activated of course, and then go to Objects, Set Origin, Origin to Center of Mass, Volume. And now finally you can check that all the objects has correctly set the origin in the center, especially for the tires, because the tires need to rotate correctly. Tip number 11. Align objects. RBC add-on needs you to align your tires. Sometimes when you download objects from internet, you can check your tires if they are in the correct place. For example, in this case, I had to adjust a little bit the position of the left tire. You basically want to have the center of the tires to be aligned together. In general, check every tire from the front view and from the side, so that you're not going to have any surprise with the physics simulation later. Tip number 12. Apply scale and rotation. Select all the objects that compose this car and then go to the menu Object, Apply, Apply Scale, and you're gonna do the same also for the rotation. So Object, Apply, Apply Rotation. Finally, we have set a default value in all these objects for both the rotation and the scale. The final tips are valid only when you use some original Blender projects. Tip number 13. Make single user objects. For example, in this scene, you can see we have an original Blender file. I have this car, and whenever I enter in edit mode for one tire and I try to edit the geometry, this is affecting also the geometry of all the other tires for some reason. And this happens because in this scene we have some instances. So to fix this, just select all the objects in the scene and then just go to the menu Object, Relations, Make Single User, Object and Data. And now if you try to edit the geometry of one tire, this is not affecting anymore all the other tires. Instances objects are not real objects, are just linked to one original object, which can be fine for saving a little bit of time during render and a little bit of memory, but this is not good. If you are going for physics simulation, you need to have all real objects. Tip number 14. Delete any modifiers. You can see, for example, in this scene, every single object has some modifiers, especially the subdivision surface. We need to delete any subdivision surface or any modifier that we have in these objects. Don't apply the subdivision, because this is going to create a lot of unnecessary geometry, as we said before. So just delete the subdivision modifier from every object. Eventually, you're going to check that we don't have any other type of modifier. In the body of this car, for example, we have some wireframe modifier, a subdivision that I delete. The mirror modifier probably is the only modifier that I want to apply instead of delete. So we need real geometry, and so for this reason I'm going to go in this arrow and clicking on apply. And finally we have some real geometry to work with. As always, when you are preparing for physics simulation, you want to have real objects with real geometry. As much low poly as possible, by the way. Tip number 15. Adjust the rotation of the tires. Every tire should be rotated exactly like the car body. In this case, the tires are a little bit rotated in a wrong way. So in this case, it's very useful to go on Edit, Preferences, Addons, and search for the Copy Attributes addon. What you want to do is to check that this checkbox is active, and then click on Save Preferences. This is a very useful free add-on included in Blender, and this means that now we can select the two tires. And holding Shift as a last element, you want to select the car body. And thanks to the Copy Attributes add-on, we can press Ctrl-C and choose Copy Rotation. And you will see that the tires now are correctly rotated, like the car body. Sometimes you might have also to rotate a tire by 180 degrees. Tip number 16. Check for constraints. Sometimes when you download cars that are in native Blender format, you don't know it, but you may have some constraints. You have to check for constraints, because constraints can interrupt the workflow of RBC add-on. So for example, this tire here, if you go in the constraint panel here, for example, in this case, we have a copy rotation constraint here. What you need to do is to apply this constraint. So you go in this arrow and apply. Alright, that's everything that you need to know in order to prepare properly any car for physics simulations, for destruction, or maybe for simply using it in RBC add-on. I hope this tutorial was useful, and I'll see you in the next one.